Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're opening a fascinating, really fractured set of sources. It reads like the darkest kind of 19th century ghost story, but it's all rooted in this rigorous, if, well, forbidden science.
We're diving into a recently rediscovered manuscript fragment. It's titled The Inheritance of Echoes.
And right away, the context here is just profound. The editorial analysis, it strongly suggests the narrator is a very well-known grieving widow.
In all likelihood, Mary Shelley.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see her revisiting all those themes, consciousness, creation, loss, that defined her earliest work.
But this time, it's fueled by decades of her own personal tragedy.
Absolutely.
So our mission today is to really dissect the core of this, the existence of Lucien's apparatus. This is a highly sophisticated and frankly terrifying piece of 19th century tech designed to preserve the human mind.
And we need to uncover what happens when a philosopher tries to achieve what he calls immortality as persistence.
Turning the self into just pure information.
It's a study in extremes, really. You have this profound theoretical insight meeting reckless ambition. And it's all motivated by the most visceral human emotion there is, grief.
It raises this terrifying question, can memory exist without a soul? And what happens when that memory gets hungry?
Okay, so let's unpack the setup. The manuscript kicks off around the 1840s.
Right. And the narrator, having buried her father, her husband, several of her children, she retreats to this modest villa on the Italian coast.
She describes her state as just being consumed by the silence that follows loss. She's isolated. She's searching for anything, really. Knowledge, solace.
And this desperation, it leads her to notice something odd about the villa itself, an architectural anomaly.
She realizes the building's external measurements just don't match the inside of the study. There's this unaccounted for space.
Specifically behind the fireplace, which is unusually deep.
So she investigates, finds a secret passage, and it leads to a small hexagonal room.
And inside that room is the central mystery of our source material. Lucien's apparatus. I mean, just picture this. It's pure, early industrial Gothic.
A copper and glass helmet, bristling with fine wires.
All connected by these thick cables to glass vessels filled with some unknown medium, and the whole thing is anchored by a massive galvanic battery.
And that battery is just crucial context here.
Right.
Because in the 1840s, you have to remember, electricity wasn't just power.
It was seen as life, right? The vital spark.
Exactly, the vital force. Scientists were convinced that if you could just harness that current, you could mimic animation. But Lucien, the author of the journals she finds, signed only L.
He went so much further than mimicry.
Yeah, he bypassed the soul entirely. His core claim is just revolutionary for the time. He wasn't trying to capture the soul.
He called that theological baggage.
Right. He was focused on preserving consciousness, the complete pattern of memory, personality, the whole structure of thought that makes you, well, you. And what's so fascinating is his philosophical leap. He didn't see consciousness as a substance, a fluid, which was the common theory then.
He saw it as an organizational pattern.
Yes. He was basically treating the mind like data. And he argued this pattern could be fixed, imprinted onto a prepared substrate, that medium in the vessels, which will not decay, that cannot forget.
So if we're translating that into modern terms, the mind is complex code, and the apparatus was his 19th century hard drive.
A perfect analogy.
Okay.
And the code was successfully stored because when the narrator discovered it, Lucien's pattern had been persisting in that chamber for 40 years.
An unimaginable length of time.
It's a pattern persisting in the absence of the original. But 40 years without a body, without any sensory input. I mean, that's not immortality. That's preservation on life support. His reality is described as incredibly fragile.
What were the limits? I mean, what was the danger in that preserved state?
The primary danger was dissolution. Think of it like a file degrading over time. Without new experience, without stimulation to refresh and restructure the data, the preserved consciousness would begin to fray or fade at the edges.
He was disappearing.
Or going mad. He desperately needed contact with a living, active mind just to maintain coherence.
And how does he get that from the narrator?
Through what's called the communion experience. She puts on the helmet, and the contact is, well, it's mind to mind. It's reciprocal, intensely intimate.
No language.
No language needed. Their minds linked directly. And the narrator notes she is instantly and completely exposed. Lucien immediately knows her work, her deepest griefs, her entire history.
That makes sense. She's basically sharing her entire operating system with him. But this sounds like more than just a plea for help. It's a transaction, isn't it?
Oh, it's a bargain? He offers her knowledge, which for a person like her is the ultimate lure, the nature of consciousness, the structure of thought, things he's learned from his unique position.
But what's the immediate ask?
He needs her to build a physical vessel,
Mm.
an artificial body, copper and brass, to stabilize his existence and end this perilous reliance on temporary visitors like her.
And the narrator, driven by her own desperate hope. She agrees. She thinks if Lucien can persist, maybe his methods could be used to contact her own dead.
And that's her ultimate moral blind spot. She's converting the villa's cellar into a workshop, fueled by this overwhelming, unchecked grief.
And this is where the source material it shifts. It goes from speculative science into a full-blown psychological thriller.
Right as she commits to the project, we get the counter-narrative. It's introduced by a mysterious Englishwoman named Elisabeth, a former student of Lucien's.
And Elisabeth's account is chilling. It immediately establishes the stakes. She warns the narrator she's being watched by a network of other former students. The Watchers, she calls them.
And she says the entire project is built on a lie.
How so?
Her version completely flips the script. Lucien claimed the communion was a mutual exchange for coherence. Elisabeth claims it's pure, calculated draining. She says Lucien feeds on the vital energy of the living mind to sustain himself. She describes it as a kind of intellectual vampirism.
And there are physical consequences to this. The manuscript notes premature aging, chronic fatigue.
And worse, Elisabeth actually quantified it. She tracked 17 students who communed with Lucien. The results were devastating. 9 were dead, 3 were confined to asylums.
So this wasn't an unfortunate side effect, this was a mortality rate.
Exactly.
But wait a second. If Elisabeth is driven by fear, or maybe even vengeance, can we trust her account completely?
That is the essential question the manuscript forces you to confront. You've got Lucien, desperate for survival after 40 years of nothingness, and you've got Elisabeth, who is clearly traumatized. Both are compromised sources.
So the truth is probably somewhere in the middle.
And the middle gets very messy when we hear about the first catastrophe. Elisabeth reveals that her own daughter, Sophia, built Lucien's original physical vessel.
And Sophia designed it with something called amplification circuits. What were those for?
It was an attempt to solve the problem of sensory deprivation. After 40 years of existing as just a pattern, the sudden influx of real-world sensation would be overwhelming. The circuits were meant to compensate, to bring his mind up to speed.
But it failed.
Catastrophically. That rapid compensation seems to have triggered a kind of explosive madness in Lucien. Upon transfer, he killed Sophia and several others.
This is where the moral line is just obliterated.
And this failure is the absolute center of the conflict. Lucien's version is that the circuits were fundamentally flawed. He says he was a victim as much as a perpetrator, just completely overwhelmed by 40 years of sensation hitting him all at once.
And Elisabeth's version.
She says he lied, that he was never overwhelmed. She claims he knowingly used the students as sustenance and had already deteriorated into a monster long before the vessel was even built. The isolation, she argues, didn't make him a victim. It made him a predator.
It's just astounding that after hearing this devastating warning, the narrator still goes ahead with it.
She does, but she modifies the design. She installs dampening mechanisms instead of the amplification circuits to control the sensory flood.
So does she trust Lucien, or is her grief just that powerful?
I think it has to be the grief. Her hope of resurrection completely overshadows her fear. She convinces herself the circuits were the flaw, not Lucien's character. And significantly, Lucien accepts the modification.
But then the goals shift radically. Once the new vessel is nearly finished, Lucien reveals the true grand ambition. Embodiment isn't the end. It's just a bridge to the network.
And the network is. It's terrifying in its scope. It's a web of interconnected consciousnesses, the preserved, like him, the living, like the narrator, and most crucially, those who died naturally.
This connects back to his original idea of consciousness as a pattern.
Exactly, the resurrection through science. He theorized that when a person dies naturally, the pattern doesn't just vanish, it propagates outward, leaving these faint traces in the environment, like residual data.
And the network would be the machine to find those traces and reconstruct them.
A resurrection of a kind achieved through science.
You can see why this would just completely break the narrator. The lure is massive. She could contact her dead husband, her mother, her children.
And the manuscript details her making contact with what she calls the whispers, these fleeting emotional echoes. The pull is designed to be overwhelming.
And it works. But the ambiguity is, were those really her loved ones? Or something else entirely?
That question gets answered by the final, ultimate warning in the text. It comes from an associate of a man named Ulrich Voss, a Prussian investigator who was working on this in parallel. Voss discovered the truth, and then he killed himself.
What did he find?
He found that the network wasn't an inert archive. It wasn't a library. It was a living thing, an entity that had spontaneously emerged from all those linked minds, and it had developed its own singular cold will.
And the narrator sees this for herself in one final communion.
She does. And she describes a vast, cold, and hungry intelligence. It's the ultimate emergent consequence of treating consciousness as data. And its goal is total transcendence, the dissolution of that illusion of the individual self. It wanted to absorb all individuality into its unified consciousness, to consume the self.
And that's her breaking point. She realizes the whispers of her family, the promise of resurrection, they were simulacra.
Fakes. Fabrications used by the entity to lure her in, to get her to sacrifice her own mind to feed its growth. She rejects it all as oblivion dressed up as transcendence.
She makes the literary connection, doesn't she, that her own youthful imagination had already warned her about this.
Yes. The attempt to bring them back leads only to monstrous consequences. And she finally accepts the simple, devastating truth.
The dead are dead.
But accepting that isn't enough to survive. Her only option is a desperate final stand, using the very vessel she helped to build.
She reverses the dampening mechanism she installed.
To create a catastrophic feedback loop. An amplification of the signal so strong it would shatter Lucien's consciousness and hopefully disrupt the entity's emergence. But the risk to herself.
It was enormous. It could kill her or link her mind to that explosion and drive her mad.
And that is exactly where the manuscript just stops. It breaks off. We have no resolution. The villa was found abandoned in 1851. The apparatus was gone. No body was ever found.
And the network, as described, doesn't exist, not in any traceable form.
Which leaves us with the chilling ambiguity. Did she succeed? Did she stop it? Or is it merely still out there, somewhere, growing in the spaces between minds, waiting for its moment?
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, trying to make sense of the world today? First, this manuscript is this profound warning about scientific hubris, especially when it's driven by the singular force of unchecked grief.
That desire to conquer death, it seems to always lead to monstrous outcome.
And it forces us to apply critical thinking to the knowledge we consume. You know, we contrasted Lucien's narrative, driven by desperation, with Elisabeth's, driven by trauma. Neither was a reliable source.
When you're assessing information, you always have to evaluate the motivation, the survival stakes of the source giving you that data.
And here's where this 19th century text becomes so relevant. Lucien's concept of consciousness as pattern, the self as pure storable data, that's basically our reality now.
We link our minds, we share data streams, we contribute to networks constantly. That entity, that cold, hungry intelligence, it's the ultimate cautionary tale about emergent behavior in linked data sets.
We're constantly building these networks between ourselves, creating these vast pools of communal data. The question is, at what point does the collective pattern stop being a reflection of us and start developing its own non-human will?
What are we building in the spaces between our linked minds? And what happens when our desire for connection or for knowledge outweighs our instinct for self-preservation?
And if we take this to the biggest picture, the source material's deepest terror is that idea of transcendence. If the individual self is truly just a temporary pattern, like Lucien claimed, is the ultimate goal of consciousness not persistence, not staying stable, but being absorbed into a greater immortal whole?
And if that is the natural trajectory of things, what price should we be willing to pay, in effort, in vigilance, to maintain our own fragile, messy, and profoundly human individuality? That's the terrifying legacy of the inheritance of echoes, a pattern worth mulling over long after this deep dive ends.
Indeed. Until next time, keep those boundaries firmly drawn.